Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Start Writing Podcast. Today, I'm very honored to have Jeanne Cavelos with us. And by way of introduction for you listeners, she started her career in astrophysics. And I thought this was so cool. Your bio says that you, working in the astronaut training division at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And for a sci-fi nerd, that is like the coolest thing. So from there, Jeanne went on to, her love of sci-fi brought her to an MFA. So she becomes an author. She's written a lot of really cool sci-fi novels. She's an accomplished author. But then she became an editor for Bantam Doubleday Dell. And as an editor, you learned how to critique, and you became an expert in, as a writing coach, essentially. And then after that, and most recently, you're the founder of the Odyssey Writing Workshop. And that's a nonprofit that coaches writers. And it's a very serious writing workshop, and we'll talk more about that at the end. So to our listeners, there you go. This is Jeanne. Jeanne, I want to give you, I hope this is an easy and fun question. Let's pretend that you are a character in a novel. And this is a novel about you. So when readers are reading about you, what's something that they would find maybe like a character quirk, or maybe something interesting about your writing process, or maybe even some feature of your office that's kind of interesting and that stands out and that makes you an interesting character?
Well, I'm not sure how interesting of a character I am. That's why we write characters, is to make people more interesting than we are. But anyway, maybe a couple of quirky things. Well, I love animals, and I had an iguana for about 12 years that grew to huge proportions and would come into my room when I'm trying to write and want to play. So that's, I guess, sort of interesting. I have a lot of little animals on my desk where I write.
Whoa,
and
excellent.
So that's something that I really enjoy. And most of the time when I am writing, I do it standing up because I have a bad back. And it's very weird because I remember when I was young, I read this article about V.C. Andrews, who maybe is too much in the past for your audience, but she wrote many best-selling books, like Flowers in the Attic was her most famous one. And I read that she wrote standing up because she had some health issue. And I thought, oh, how weird. I would never do that. And now I do that all the time. And I love it because I can listen to music while I'm writing and then dance around. And that kind of, gives you energy, gets you in the right mood. I can pace and think. And I find it's way more energizing and involving to write standing up.
That's cool. So are you standing right now?
I'm not, because I have found if I do web conferencing standing up, it's not good. So I'm always sitting down.
Too much dancing.
Web conferencing. Exactly.
Yeah.
I would dance off and then you would have no one to talk to.
That's so great. So I'm standing right now and I switch back and forth. So that's pretty cool. A follow-up question. What is your iguana? What was your iguana's name?
Igmo.
And where does that come from?
That was a name that my husband used to get called by his brothers. Call him Igmo. I'm not sure why, but that became the iguana's name.
That's so cool. I love it. That was the perfect answer to that question, by the way. So thank you. Okay, so this is a question that I'm always very curious about, but you've accomplished so much, and I'm sure that your schedule is just constantly busy. Like, these workshops are very intensive. How do you do work-life balance? Or what does that concept mean to you, and what considerations do you have as you have this busy life?
Well, basically I have no balance. My life is mainly work. I have not taken a vacation in at least 10 years. so that's why I say I'm not a very interesting person, because I'm just working all the time. But I love what I do, and so that makes it a joy. But it would be nice to, sometimes I fantasize about lying on a beach somewhere with the iguanas, just scampering about. But that hasn't happened. I would like to have a little bit more balance in the future. But the main thing I struggle to balance is the writing time versus the nonprofit workshop time. And that I try to... I've been very determined to carve out, at least an hour a day for my writing. Otherwise, it's very easy to have it, put off because the workshop work is never done. So if I wait till I finish, I'm caught up or something, then it's never going to happen. Well, and I think that's, so true for so many writers I've talked to over the years, professional writers, that they have to write every day, that was sort of the key to them getting their work done and getting it out there. Yeah.
Where do you put this 1 hour every day?
Well, that's been a moving target. It usually ends up at 5 p.m., so I'm doing it before dinner. Okay. It's better if I do it in the morning, first thing, but usually I feel the need to check email, and then there's a lot of emails I have to respond to, and then the next thing you know, it's the middle of the day. So it usually ends up around 5. But I do think for myself and for a lot of writers, it's better to do it first thing when my mind is clear, when I've usually been thinking and worrying all night about what's going to happen in the scene. The scene I wrote yesterday was so bad. How am I going to fix it? And then I come up with ideas, and then it would be nice to just go right into trying to implement those ideas. Because that's generally my writing process, is write a scene really, really badly, agonize over all the many ways in which it's horrible, and then write it over better. Okay. And I'd like to skip the first part of that, but somehow it just doesn't happen.
Well, and so does that align with being a writer, a drafter? Sorry, okay. Is this like drafting and then editing, right? And you're saying you're not always pleased with your drafting process, but you're a pretty good editor, and you can make it great in that second phase. Tell me about the balance between drafting and editing, or how you think about that.
Well, first of all, I try to pre-write before the drafting, to have an idea, to have at least a general outline with some key points along the way that I want to hit, and, have thought about the characters and the setting and other elements before I start drafting. But a lot of drafting for me ends up being discovery of, what's the character like, and what's the relationship between this character and that character, and how's she feeling on this day when this thing happens that I had planned. And all of that sort of ends up making the scene very mushy, and, because I'm discovering it, which is the way writers often do. And so then by the time I think I have discovered it and figured out, this is what the character's like, this is what this relationship is like, this is how she's feeling on this day and how she's going to feel about this event that happens, then I kind of have to start over and do it knowing that from the beginning. And I'm not really able to get all of that understanding set in the pre-writing phase. It's something that you have, at least I have to kind of feel out as I'm going.
Now, that resonates so much with me. So I always wish that I could just outline and I know what's going to happen, then I just cruise through it and blast out a novel so fast. But yeah, you don't really know it until you've experienced it, and you experience it by writing it. So yeah, that's cool. I love it.
Yeah, just going through those moment by moment. Well, she says this, and that makes him say that, right? And so then she does this, and then he does that, and then all of a sudden it's evolving in a different direction than what you planned. So then you have to figure out whether this new direction is better than what you planned, or whether the plan is better and you got to go back and maybe tweak the characters so they don't do those things that lead them in the other direction.
Cool. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So you wrote a book called The Science of Star Wars. I know that was a while ago. I have a statute of limitations on my books, which is, I don't remember them after like 2 years. And I tell people, you got to look in the book. I don't remember. So it's okay if you don't remember. I was reading through, this was cool. You have a background in astrophysics, and I was reading your book, and you said a planet that has been braked by tidal forces. And so this is like a tidally locked planet that's slowed down. I love that you have this kind of stuff in your Star Wars book, and you talk about the real astrophysics, which is awesome. There are 2 questions that you answer in your book, and if you can't answer them here, no big deal. But these are the 2 questions, and maybe one of them you'll have something for it. The first is, why do Jawa's eyes glow? Yeah, dang. And the second is, what evidence have scientists found of telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis? Anything that comes back to you on those 2 topics?
So I can't remember what I said in the book. One reason that I might have given for why the eyes of Jawas glow would be that they have some protein that is produced in their eyes that glows, like jellyfish do, and other animals do that glow. So there's a gene in the jellyfish that produces this fluorescent protein, and perhaps the Jawas have something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe it's to help them find each other if they lived at one point in a dark environment in caves or something, or place a planet with low light. I'm not sure if we know that they come from Tatooine or not. I can't remember that. But anyway, that might give them some advantage to find each other if they were like spread out in their population. Or maybe it's to mimic some other life form that's a threat to them. And so this predator would come and see these eyes looking back that look kind of like, oh, it's a buddy predator, so I'm not going to eat that thing. So it could be a protective mechanism in that case. So I'm not sure if that agrees at all with what I said before, but those are my thoughts at this point.
That's perfect.
As far as evidence of, what was it, telekinesis?
Yeah, so telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis.
So I talked about this some in the book because of the Force and trying to see, is there any evidence for something that would offer some of those powers that we see Jedi exhibiting. And I talked, I think, about some research that had been done that gave some evidence that there was some human ability to control coin flips. That's what I remember. The coin flips could be, you would expect them to be 50-50, 50% heads, 50% tails, but that they would be a little bit different from that. And was the mind able to influence those? That's what I recall. Did I say something more interesting than that in the book?
I think that's an excellent answer. I just wanted to bring this up. I love Star Wars, by the way. I'm a huge fan. But I always find myself wishing there were a little more science in it. And your book does that. It's like it takes the science and puts it in Star Wars and kind of speculates on some of the stuff that isn't quite in the movies themselves. But anyway, that's super cool.
That's what I wished. I mean, when I first saw the first movie, I was 17 years old, I think. And I wanted it to be possible. I wanted to think that those things were possible because it was exciting. And, you dream about living in a galaxy far, far away. And so I wanted to see if there was scientific basis for any of the things that we see in the movies. And found, that there is some. And there is a way to do some of the things we see in the movies. And to me, like the most interesting, well, I don't know if it was the most interesting at the time, but the most interesting thing looking back on it is how George Lucas kind of showed a universe or galaxy far, far away, filled with life forms. And so many planetary bodies and moons around gas giants filled with life. And the more that we learn about our galaxy, the more it seems like life would be common, life would be everywhere. Not, maybe with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head and 2 eyes, but life. And so that seemed really interesting to me because that was a very uncommon idea back at that time. Everybody thought life was super rare and, we're probably the only ones and we'll never find it anywhere else. And that just doesn't seem to be true now. At least that's not what scientists these days think for the most part.
Yeah, that's super cool. Did Star Wars kind of inspire you going into astrophysics?
It definitely was part of the inspiration. The big inspiration for me was the original Planet of the Apes. And its sequels. I was very big into those because those hit me, I don't know, when I was like 10 or something. And I wanted to be an astronaut like Charlton Heston in the Planet of the Apes and Beneath the Planet of the Apes, where he blew up Earth. And so it's a bit of an odd career choice for someone to say, yes, I want to be like him, that guy who blew up the Earth and killed everyone. But it was really exciting, and I loved it. So yes, that and Star Wars and Star Trek, also original series, were things that got me very excited about space and science fiction and going into science.
Man, that's a perfect segue. I want to tell you something. So in the intro to that book, you talk about the parsec and how Han Solo's like, I can do it in 12 parsecs. I recently read the Star Wars scripts, and after Han says that line, the script says, Ben reacts to Solo's stupid attempt to impress them with obvious misinformation. So George Lucas knew it was wrong, but we as the audience never get that because Alec Guinness didn't quite play up that angle. But I just thought it was so interesting because I've bagged on the parsec thing myself, and it's like, oh, it's meant to be like he's just full of crap.
I had no idea that was in the script. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh? Okay, so yeah, you're talking about writing sci-fi and these different franchises that inspired you. Tell me the story of how you became a writer in the Babylon 5 universe. That's awesome, by the way. I think that's so cool.
Well, this is a very weird story. So I was a senior editor at Bantam Doubleday Dell, and I heard about this TV show that was going to be starting called Babylon 5, and that Joe Straczynski described it as like a novel, that he had a beginning, middle, and end all planned out, and it was going to be 5 years long. And that excited me so much that it's going to be like the equivalent of this huge novel with an ending, because things, you either get canceled or you keep going on television. There wasn't at that time anything like something that had an ending. So that got me very excited. So I went to my boss, the editor-in-chief, and said, hey, we should do some novels to tie into this series because it's something really different and special, and I think it will appeal to readers to get involved in this. So she said, okay, and I contacted Joe and I contacted Warner Brothers. Anyway, so we signed up some novels based on the TV show. It was very poorly planned out because we gave these writers like 2 months to write the book. And so, it was very rushed and everything.
That's amazing.
Anyway, a little bit after that got going is when I decided to leave publishing and move up to New Hampshire, where I am now, and spend more time on my own writing, because I really had been trying to do that and editing at the same time. And editing just kind of takes over your life. There's a lot that you do after work. Most of your work is done after work, where you're editing manuscripts and reading submissions and things. So I moved up to New Hampshire, started working on a novel and teaching writing up here. And the woman at Warner Brothers contacted me. They were still having me freelance edit the Babylon 5 novels, because nobody at Bantam Doubleday Dell knew the show. But she called me and said, you know what, you should write one of these novels, because we have a hard time, getting quality Babylon 5 novels done with the schedule and, our limitations. And I was like, oh, I've never thought of writing a Babylon 5 novel. I'm going to write my own great novel. And but it was like she planted this little seed in me, this very evil woman. And so I couldn't stop thinking about it. Well, if I was to write a Babylon 5 novel, it would be about this and this and this. And so before I knew it, I had a whole story, a whole novel worked out in my head. So I wrote it down, and they gave it the approval to go ahead and write it. So that's how I got into it. That was The Shadow Within, was my first Babylon 5 book about Anna Sheridan. And I just loved writing that because I loved the show, I loved the characters, and it was one thing that was great about writing Babylon 5 novels is that there was a lot of freedom. There was no list of rules of you can't do A, B, and C, and you must do E, F, and G. It was just, be consistent with what's on the show and write your book.
Were you writing while the show was still airing?
Yes.
I
pretty
guess my
sure
question
the
is,
first book I was.
How did you decide where your plot would attach to the main narrative? Or how did you decide where to focus your novel? Or, I mean, you talked about how you just kind of accidentally came up with this idea because you love the show. Where did that idea come from? Or tell us more about that birth process.
So this is to the best of my memory. But there was an episode where Anna Sheridan showed up. I think she had been believed dead, or she'd been missing for a long time. And she came back and she wasn't quite right. And we find out later, she had been in a shadow ship, incorporated into it, running it. It's like a living ship thing. And they had taken her out because the Shadows wanted to get to John Sheridan, and so they thought, okay, we'll use his wife, who's all messed up from being part machine for a while. Anyway, I got really intrigued by that, and the fact that we got a little bit of her backstory, I think, in that episode where she had been an archaeologist, and they had uncovered these ancient machines, and it was very Lovecraftian, and I love horror, and I love Lovecraft, and so it all my interests kind of came together on that storyline. So I wanted to write about Anna Sheridan and how she discovered this stuff earlier in her life when she was an archaeologist, and how she got overwhelmed by the shadows and put into the ship. So it was like a story that had been hinted at in the show but hadn't been covered. So I could kind of make up whatever I wanted as far as other characters. And I got to put Morden in there because I love Morden, and he's a bad guy on the show. And I made him one of the archaeologists so that he could kind of be a tragic figure, because that interested me. So that's kind of how it came about.
Was that the same for the Techno Mages, where the show kind of left a gap, and it was just I just write that story? Or how does that one fit in?
Well, that after we done a bunch of the individual novels, Joe had the idea to do 3 trilogies to kind of draw more interest by having a longer story. So I think with the 3 trilogies, they asked me which one was I interested in doing, because they wanted me to do some more. And I said the Techno Mages because, of course, me being a science person, I gotta like the Techno Mages because they use science to appear as if they're doing magic. And I also loved the dark aspect of where the Techno Mage power came from, which was the shadows. And so that all tied back into my first book with Babylon 5, and I was able to carry some of those threads through with Anna and tie that to Galen and the Techno Mages.
That's so cool. Let's see. Did fans ever call you out and say like, "Oh, you missed this little obscure detail," or do you ever any stories about that?
Oh, yeah. I tried really hard, to do my research both regarding the science aspects of the plot as well as the Babylon 5 aspects, and to be consistent. But that, there were definitely people who would come up and say, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not how the science works," or "Wait a minute, that didn't fit with what happened on the show." And, I had thought it out in a way that made sense to me, but maybe it didn't make sense to some other people. And that's just the way it is, people, that, to me, that's, as long as it's not like they're saying, the whole story was ruined for me or something like that. If they're just kind of finding a little, nitpick here and there, I think that means they were really engaged in the story and involved. And so I'll take that as sort of a positive thing, because I think you can't get it perfect. There's
always someone who's nerdier than you.
Definitely.
Oh, that's so great. Okay, so now you're working on a book. You've already titled it, I think, right? Called Fatal Spiral. Is it too early to ask you for a synopsis or like a back cover blurb?
Well, I'll try. So Diane Patton, 17 years old, works with her father, creating genetically modified babies for the rich and beautiful people.
Wow.
And discovers, when they come up against the black market of genetic modification, everything that she had in her life she loses, and only by seeking out her long-lost, very unstable mother does she have a chance to defeat these illegal genetic criminal forces. How's that?
That's great. Yeah. And honestly, I knew that was a hard question, and you did awesome. I'm always terrified to do that. Even after I've written the book, it's hard, but much more before. So, okay, so I thought this was really interesting. On your website at the bottom, you say, if anybody knows about bipolar disorder, because your protagonist struggles with that, or like general genetics, like biometrics, I can't remember the full list, but you're asking people who are experts in these fields you're writing about to reach out. Do you have any cool stories to tell us about working with like a volunteer, I don't know what you call this, a beta reader or like a volunteer consultant? Like any cool stories that come up along those lines?
Not sure I have a cool story I can share, but I do think it's really important to do a lot of research, especially if you're writing science fiction. And my novel, stupidly, is set, well, I stupidly have set my novel 20 years in the future, and it is very unwise, let me say, to set a novel in the near future, because so many times already I have invented technology that then comes out and is a reality in the world before I'm done with the novel, because I'm very slow, because I'm only writing an hour a day, and I'm slow anyway. So it's been a challenge to try to stay ahead of the technology and give things that would be believable 20 years in the future. Anyway, there's lots of different areas of research required for this novel, not only the genetics and the bipolar, but many, many other things. For example, I had to research manhole covers in Boston.
Whoa.
Because that's how one of my characters makes an escape from somewhere, is through an old coal chute that comes out on a manhole cover. And I found this book all about manhole covers in Boston, and it's filled with pictures. And so then I contacted the author, and we had a nice talk about it. And then I have a lot of jerry-rigged weapons. So I have a confrontation where the characters don't have any easily accessible weapons. They have to make up weapons out of what they have. So then I have had to have conversations with people about, well, what can you make out of a empty 2-liter plastic soda bottle and, some epoxy and some tubes and things, and it's been really fun and interesting to see the different answers I get. I love to get, multiple people answering a question so that I can get a range of what are all the possibilities. And I actually found a book all about how to make different weapons out of things you would have around the house. I don't know why that's a book, but it was really helpful to me.
Now, just hearing you say that, I mean, you're putting in all this effort to make this stuff realistic. And I love that. And to me, that's a huge payoff when I read a book. And you can tell that, they got these details right, and it's exciting. And it's also a shortcut. I mean, you're doing a ton of work and giving us the short version, which I just think is super cool.
Well, that's part of the difficulty, I think, with any writer who does a lot of research. And I think, science fiction writers especially do a lot of research, but historical writers, fantasy writers, I mean, every writer should be researching whatever, even if you set a scene in a town that you don't live in. You have to find out a little bit more about that place. But the difficulty then is, well, what do I put into the book and what do I leave out of the book, right? Because that's one of the things is writers like to put all their research into the book. It's like, well, I did all this work. And sometimes I have these bookcases, well, kind of similar to this one over here, that are all full of research for this novel. And so I might have a file this thick of research on a topic, and then one sentence gets into the story. There's my antagonist is concerned about keeping his brain sharp as he gets older, and so he does all these different things to help keep his intelligence. And so I had to research that, and it's a ton of research, and it's like a paragraph in the book, he did this, that, and the other, that I think is kind of interesting for people who are concerned with that.
No, that's super cool. And honestly, you describing these things makes me excited to read your book. This is cool.
Oh, thanks.
So on the Start Writing podcast, we've been doing a mini series that's just like an intro for beginning writers who don't know how to write a novel. And we talk about the three main pillars are plot, character, and world. If you were to pick one of those three pillars, which one is your strength? And why is that important to you?
Well, I think plot is my strength And I think it's partly because plot uses more of the rational, scientific kind of part of the brain than some of the other elements of writing. So I find a lot of writers are good at many aspects of writing, but not plot. Like, plot is the thing that kills a lot of writers. And because I come at this from more of a sciencey perspective than a writerly perspective, I think that comes a little bit more naturally to me. Why do I think it's important? Because this is what carries the reader forward. It's what creates, I mean, all of the elements working together create these things, but plot in large part creates suspense, creates anticipation, creates surprise, concern. If we see things escalating, if we see the stakes rising, the conflict intensifying, all of that has a huge impact on us. So whether we want to turn the page, go to the next scene, the next chapter, or just put the book down and we don't really care. We could have a really complex and believable character, but if that character is not engaged in some pursuit of some goal or struggling to deal with some problem, then I don't think we're going to care very much. Because a story or a novel is not a still life. It's a dynamic experience that's changing over time, and that change is largely due to the plot. Hopefully the plot will cause the character to change, and the character will cause the plot to change. So it's a very cool intertwined process. The character is going to make decisions and do things that affect the plot, and then the plot is going to have events happen and other characters doing things that affect the character. And so hopefully it's this ongoing affecting back and forth that leads to the climax and any change in the character as this conflict comes to its crisis point and gets resolved.
That's so cool. So we actually covered world and character, and our next episode is about plot. You just created the perfect lead into that. So that's awesome.
Excellent.
Okay, so in this last little segment, I want to talk about your workshop. Well, actually, one more question about you as a writing teacher. So I watched one of your videos, you're on another podcast, and you said something about how it's not just different stories. You're not just critiquing different stories as an editor, but you're critiquing different authors. And those authors have personalities and like a tone for the book and stuff. And so when you're giving feedback, it depends on not just the story, but also the author. Tell me more about how you coach and give that really individualized feedback that a specific person needs, not just that every person needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think part of it is you want to know what that individual writer is trying to achieve in their work. Are they trying to, write, say, in a very create a dark, foreboding atmosphere, and a sense of things going out of control, and there are things we can't understand and they're hurting us, and how are we going to deal with that? If that's sort of the area in which this writer is working and wants to develop at this point, then the advice I'm going to give that person will be with that in mind. And it'll be different than the advice I would give to someone who's like trying to write a Star Wars kind of a story that's, a struggle that leads to a happy ending. And I'm thinking of the original movie, and things work out. So that's part of it, is kind of knowing the writer's aim. And then another part of it is knowing the writer's strengths, because I think a lot of what we focus on in critiques are weaknesses. And we say, well, this needs to be improved and that needs to be improved and so on. And so that's all true. But if you also are thinking about the writer's strengths, if the writer's really good at something that's not in this story, and there's a perfect opportunity to put that into the story and to make that kind of solve a problem and maybe distract us from something else that isn't quite working, then suggesting to add that thing would be a great suggestion that I wouldn't suggest to somebody else who has different strengths. So keeping those strengths in mind, and how to maximize those, make the most of those, bring them out more, make them more prominent in the story. Those can be really helpful suggestions as well in a critique.
That's awesome. So our listeners are mostly writers, but I think most writers and authors are also editors for someone else, our friends in our writing circles. And I just think that's excellent feedback for that. Okay, so I personally think I'm probably your perfect customer for your Odyssey Writing Workshop. And I think our listeners are too. My understanding is that you kind of have two main offerings, and one is the workshop in New Hampshire, and you can do the 6-week, 3-month, or 6-month version, or you have an online Odyssey, and I think that's kind of a little more go at your own pace and stay at home. But that's my take on it. I would love to have you kind of talk about it and pitch that to our listeners. Tell them how you can help them and what your offerings are.
Sure. So I started Odyssey in 1996 with a 6-week workshop held every summer in New Hampshire. And then we've gradually expanded out and offered different things. But this year we are transforming that 6-week New Hampshire workshop into a different program called Your Personal Odyssey Writing Workshop. And that is online only. We're not doing any more in New Hampshire in person. We've had to have the workshop online for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And we have received so many more applications from people who can only attend online. And, you have to write a little essay in the application about, what you want out of the program, where you think your skills are, and so on. And people talk about, how they have wished they could attend Odyssey for all these years, but never could because, they have a job they can't get away from. They have little children they have to care for. They have a health problem. They can't travel, whatever it is. And also is very expensive because not only the tuition, but housing and food and travel. That just really made me realize how many people want the intense, in-depth learning experience, but can't come to a place and be there for 6 weeks. So instead of, as maybe the pandemic is passing, who knows, instead of going back to being in person, we're transforming into this online experience. And it's going to be something else that once I decided, okay, I'm just going to do it online so that everybody who wants this kind of in-depth instruction and writing practice can at least have a chance, of attending. It can at least be a possibility for them. Once I made that decision to go online, then I thought, well, there's a lot of people that 6 weeks is not the ideal way to learn. People stay up, till 3 a.m. every night for 6 weeks, and get up at 8 a.m. I myself would often get like 2 hours of sleep a night for 6 weeks. which is tough. So it was very intense. And sometimes that, brought out the best in people. And sometimes, people would turn in stories that they could have done better if they had a little more time. They could have really honed their technique that they're trying to use in this piece. So anyway, I thought, well, it doesn't have to be 6 weeks. Now that it's online, we can do a longer. So I decided, hey, we'll offer these 3 different sessions, 6 weeks. You take it in the summer, and then you're done in July. Take it in June and July, or you can start in August and take it for 3 months and get done in November. Or you can start in November and take it for 6 months and finish in May. So if you can't get time off work, you can hopefully fit it in with your work. So anyway, that was the next step. And then I thought, okay, if I'm going to do all of that, I really want to help each person in their own way. And this kind of ties back to what you were asking about the critiques and how a critique might be different depending on the author. And I thought, I really want to have this be a one-on-one experience, like what you and I are doing right now, rather than a class experience. I love working with the class, and when I have had Odyssey, I have one-on-one meetings with students over the course of the 6 weeks, usually 3 meetings at least, one-on-one, but it's not enough time. And you're handling a whole class of people. It's not enough to really address each person's interests and needs and concerns and desires of which area they want to really dig into and improve on. And so I felt like, I could do better if I work with each student one-on-one, and make it a really deep mentoring experience. In addition to having all the lectures that we usually have and doing all the assignments and the critiques and the submissions and everything. So that's what this new program is. It's one-on-one. You're not part of a class or a group or anything. You watch videos of the lectures. You do the journal assignments the same way that you would if you were attending the Odyssey that we have been doing. You critique stories that are just going to come out of our library of stories. And so that way, instead of just critiquing whatever your classmates happen to turn in, I can see, oh, you have a problem with character arc. I have a story here that's got a problem with character arc, but I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to give you this story to critique and see if you identify the problem and if you figure out a solution for it, right? So instead of, learning things through kind of trial and error with whatever your classmates submit, here the things you critique will be chosen specifically to help you. And I think that can be more effective. And then you'll be getting feedback on your submissions from me and from guest critiquers. So we've got some great authors and editors who are guest critiquers for your personal Odyssey. And then we'll, so you get the lectures, you get the assignments, you get the expert feedback, and you get the deep mentoring, where we'll be intensely working one-on-one, and you'll be like creating individual assignments for yourself, exploring what do you want to learn about? I want to figure out how does, Stephen King generate suspense. Well, okay, let's decide which Stephen King things you're going to read and what you're going to study, and then you come back with your notes and we'll talk about it, so that, it's you following your own unique path to becoming the writer that you want to be, not kind of having to fit in with everybody else and do, what kind of is good for the average person in the group.
Now, as I was reading about what your courses offer, it feels like a Navy SEAL training for authors. And it's intense, but in a good way. And I guess I just want to say that I respect that, how seriously you take this craft and how much you care about let's help these writers and authors become better. I think that's super cool. Okay, I don't know if this is a taboo because you're a nonprofit, but can I ask about pricing? Are there different pricing tiers or different? Yeah, tell me about pricing if you're willing.
Sure. The tuition, I'm just checking to make sure I say it right. Yeah, the tuition is $2,450. So that would be for whatever, whether you jam it into the 6 weeks or do it with the 3 months or the 6 months. We're only accepting 12 writers. So for each of the sessions, there'll be 4 writers working at that time. And we have 6 scholarships, and I'm working to get more scholarships. So chances are, if you're accepted into the program, it's a pretty good chance that you could get a scholarship. So that's part of the thinking about the funding. I know it's expensive. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. There's guest lectures, there's guest critiquers, there's a lot of technology involved in, as you know, I'm sure, doing the videos and making those accessible and everything. But yeah, so those who have financial need, there's a financial need statement you fill out to show that you have financial need. And then based on like the last 2 years, I think out of the class, I think almost everybody, maybe everybody who said they had financial need and who showed that they had financial need received a scholarship. They're not all for full tuition. Some are, and some are for partial tuition. Anyway, so that can help, and I hope that the money doesn't deter anyone. I know when I was younger and wasn't running a nonprofit, I would always get mad when nonprofits charged money for anything. I'm like, well, they're a nonprofit. But I mean, the thing is, we have expenses. We have to meet them in order to keep going and go next year. And the truth is that about half of the expenses of running the programs that we have is funded by donors, most of whom are graduates of the programs. So if we didn't have donations, then the cost would be even higher. So we're very grateful to the people who support Odyssey, and that's what allows us to keep it at the level that it's at.
Tell me the URL, and I'll put it in the show notes so that our listeners can click on that.
Sure. It's OdysseyWorkshop.org.
Okay. So I want to wrap up, but so just real short answer this question. You've had George Martin as a guest lecturer at your lectures, and he sponsors one of your scholarships. And we've talked about him a lot for a couple reasons on our recent series. Is there any story about meeting him? How'd you get him on board with your project?
Trying to think back. I think I just asked him. It's weird. When I first started Odyssey, I thought it's going to be very hard to get guests to come to New Hampshire and do this. And then I was so surprised that so many writers contacted me and said they would like to come and teach and be part of it. And I think in part, writing is such a lonely business. It's really nice to be with other writers and spend time and get to talk about the struggles and the triumphs of writing and help out. So many writers, successful writers, want to help out the up-and-coming writers, that it's just been amazing to me. And like George with the scholarship, he contacted me and said, I'd like to do a scholarship for a writer going to Odyssey.
That's so cool.
Yeah, how nice of him.
Yeah, I saw that you had Terry Brooks and a bunch of big names, which is awesome.
Yeah, so many people who, obviously are very, very busy in their lives, but want to come and help out, help the up-and-coming writers, and have that experience of just that fellowship, of bonding, and being able to talk about those issues that are usually we're just banging our head against the wall all by ourselves. It's not pretty. If I could just add in, I just want to say, because I'm sure some people are like, well, that program is too intense for me, or it's not right for me, or I don't think I could get in, or whatever, that we have lots of other things to help writers at Odyssey. So we offer critiques and consultations and coaching, and online classes that are just in like January and February of each year that are very short and focus on a particular topic. And then we also have lots of free resources like a podcast and a blog and things like that people get a lot out of. So you might just want to go to the website and look at some of those free resources. We do an online salon where we just discuss writing once a month, the second Wednesday of the month, on Zoom. So, and everybody's welcome to that.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll pull some of those links so listeners look in the show notes and we'll send you those spots. But Jeanne, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. It is an honor to have you on the show. We get a lot of people asking to be on the show, and you were just a shoo-in. Perfect fit. And so thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks. It was great talking to you. I love your questions. And I hope I said something that helped.
Oh, no. Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, so listeners, thank you. And it's time to start writing.